Y'all finished? All right, yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. All right, let's get to it here. Dendrites, what are they? What are they? So you'll read about this here today. Okay, right after we're done going over the vocab, and I'll talk about the parts and functions of the neuron a little bit more in detail. Then you have an activity to just label it and just understand the functions of the neuron. So what are dendrites? What are they? Hallie, what do you have? Yeah, good job. So these are the branches off of the neuron that connects to, let's say, an ascending neuron. So they receive the information from ascending neuron to travel it down through its soma, be processed down the axon to another neuron. So the dendrites, they receive the information. They're almost like branches or finger-like branches that reach out and grab on and connect to the axon terminals of another neuron. All right, good. So the receiving part of the neuron. Soma, the soma. Noah, what do you have for the soma?
The cell body of the neuron is the cell.
Yeah, good job. So the cell body contains the nucleus, right? So another name for the soma is the cell body, if you just want to write that down. Axon, it's the axon. Connor, what do you have for the axon? Yeah, good job. So the axon connects to the soma, the cell body, okay, the nucleus, and where this information is sent down through the long fiber, the axon, okay, which is protected by the myelin sheath, which we'll talk about. And action potential allows for this movement to occur. Okay, so the axon is really like this one-way highway from the soma to the axon terminals. Okay, good. Myelin sheath. What do you have, Allison?
My body tissue segmentally increasing the axon neurons. It enables the greater transfer as neural impulses happen.
Yeah, good job. Good job. So the myelin sheath is this outer covering of the axon. It's like a protected part of the axon. It's almost acting like a shield, okay? Or like the plastic coating on an electrical cord. That's a good example of it. So this is the outer coating, the protected part of the axon. Okay, so this protects the axon and allows for the firing, the action potential to occur. There's microscopic holes, which leads to the next one, nodes or Ranvier, which allows for action potential to occur and for this information to be sent down the axon. So what's the nodes in Ranvier? What do you have, Haley? Okay, good. So like I said before, these are microscopic spaces of the myelin sheath that allows for action potential to occur. So really just absorbing this energy, okay, which allows for action potential to send this information down the axon. And so there's an imbalance which allows for the push of this information being sent from the soma to the axon terminals and eventually to another neuron. Good. And then finally, axon terminals. What do we have? Galen, what do you have for axon terminals?
Small swans.
Yeah, good job. So the axon terminals branch off the axon. Pretty self-explanatory, right? And it reaches out to dendrites of another neuron. So this is passing this information, okay, from that said neuron, from the axon to the dendrites of another neuron. So this information can be received, be sent, okay, through either it's a sensory neuron, motor neuron, or interneuron. All right, any questions on the vocab? So this is what we're going to be diving into today. So you can utilize your book, page 157. You're just going to read about the parts and functions of the neuron before we dive into the presentation, or you can just go online and utilize the book that way as well. So 157, there's a picture of neurons and how they connect and communicate. We'll talk about that more tomorrow. But on 157, I'd just like you to read the small section. It starts with neurons, talks about basic parts of a neuron, and that's it. Okay, like I said, we'll talk about the connection. We'll talk about how information is sent from neuron to neuron more tomorrow. So on 157, we're just going to read neurons, basic parts of the neuron, and that's it. And just refer to the picture above, 6.2. It just talks about the anatomy of the neuron, the different parts, okay, and just makes sense of what we're just going to be talking about today. All right, there you go. Again, 157, page 157. So as you're doing that, I'm going to upload this video to American history class. What's up? It's just you read the neuron, that subtopic there, and then you just read the basic parts of the neuron. That's it. So there's only just 2 paragraphs you really got to read. Just on 157. We'll talk about the connection of the neuron tomorrow and how that information is passed. Okay. Shouldn't take you long. Like I said, I just want to get this uploaded here for our American history class. There we go. All right, good. All right, so I think everybody's finished. Again, it was not much of a long reading. It was just kind of labeling the parts and really the functions of the neuron. Hopefully you guys checked out that picture. Okay, yeah, the presentation will have one too, but just as you're reading, you can refer to the figure 6.2 in your book. That'd be good. All right, so neurons, building blocks. Neurons are cells specialized, receive, process, and transmit information to other cells. And we talked about types of neurons yesterday. We talked about it on Tuesday as well. Okay, and what are the types of neurons? You guys remember? Good job, Haley. So we have the interneurons, mostly focused where? In the brain, right? Okay, this is connecting the sensory neurons to the motor neurons. Okay, yeah, there's interneurons all throughout the body, but for the most part, they're in the brain. The sensory neurons are carrying that information from a sensation mostly, okay, to the rest of the body. Okay, well, to the brain to be processed. Okay, as the brain is processing that information, okay, it's sent to the motor neurons through interneurons, where we can react, or it can move. We already talked about the central nervous system and how that kind of works with the brain, spinal cord, and peripheral nervous system. We have the voluntary, involuntary movements, somatic and autonomic, and breaking down to the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous systems. Okay, so make sure you guys remember that as well for the quiz. You might see that on maybe as a short answer. All right, so these are some of the parts we're going to talk about. So the axon, the dendrite. Okay, we talked about a few of those already. The myelin sheath. Okay, we'll also mention the axon terminals and the soma, cell body. Well, this information is being traveled, being processed, like I said, in the brain, but it needs to get there first. And neurons act as really this interconnection amongst in our body that allows us to receive this information, the sensation, the stimulus, be processed in the brain, and be sent to the rest of our body to react, okay, to certain things. All right, so like I mentioned yesterday and the day before, these are 3 types of neurons: sensory, motor, and inner, which we already talked about. I don't need to focus too much on that anymore. 3 main tasks of the neurons. So the 3 main tasks: number 1, receive information from the neurons that feed it. Okay, so through the dendrites, we'll talk about how this is all really working and how this information is being passed from one neuron, okay, through the neuron to another. Okay, and with action potential, we'll talk about resting potential. We'll talk about the refractory period. We'll talk about how this all or nothing principle occurs. Once that information is sent, it's sent. Okay, there's no going back. It's like saying something out of line. You say something, you can't really get that word back, right? So we'll talk about that more tomorrow. 2, carry information down its length. Okay, so as you can see, there's a one-way highway down the axon. As it's being processed in the nucleus, it's being sent down the axon just one way. Can't come back. And then 3, pass the information on to the next neuron. So as the information is being passed down the axon to the axon terminals, it's connected to another neuron, obviously through their dendrites, and that information is going to be sent. We'll talk about synapses tomorrow. We'll talk about how neurons connect and send information back and forth to each other. So you guys good with that? So make sure, again, you remember the 3 performance of the neuron. Sensory, we already talked about it. We're good with that. Motor, we already talked about it. We're good with that. Interneurons, we already mentioned as well. Okay, so what the neuron looks like. Like I said before, the neuron, the soma is where the nucleus is located, okay? And the dendrites branch off the soma. So these are the dendrites that are connected to other neurons, which passes information back and forth, let's say, to another neuron. So the nucleus processes that information, sends it down the axon. The myelin sheath is the outer protective covering of the axon. It protects the axon, this single fiber that reaches out to the axon terminals to connect to another neuron. And as we perform different tasks, okay, it almost becomes second nature, right? As we practice certain things, like let's say throwing a football, after a while we can just pick it up and throw it and not worry about it. And that's because we have this neural connection, this neural network, really. As we're performing a task over and over again, it becomes second nature. And that's just really how neurons connect and how these neuron fibers really advance to a point where we're building stronger neural pathways. Okay, at first, we're not very good at it. But as we perform these tasks over and over and over again, eventually we'll have a stronger neural pathway, which we'll talk more about tomorrow. Again, we kind of talked about these terms already. Let's just break it down a little bit more in detail. So the dendrite is a receiver part of the neuron. It branches out to other neurons and receives information, incoming messages from a passing neuron. So again, dendrites branch off the soma. Okay, they branch off the soma, receiving this information, be fueled into the cell body, the soma, where the nucleus is located. So when you think of a dendrite, just think of the receiver. It's catching this information and sending it directly to the soma. As you can see, there are fibers that branch off. These dendrites are connecting to other neurons. Like I mentioned before, as you're performing a task over and over and over again, you're going to have a more stronger neural connection, where more neurons decide to connect to each other, to its dendrites, to make it a stronger passageway, to make it easier to really perform these tasks. So the dendrite, the receiver part of the neuron, they branch off of the soma. All right, so like I said, the soma is that cell body, okay, where the nucleus is located. And this is protecting the nucleus for this information to be processed within the neuron. And like I said, the dendrites branch off of the soma, the cell body, where the nucleus is located. Also connected to the soma is the axon, the single larger fiber that connects all the way down this long fiber to the axon terminals to connect to another neuron. So the soma, its main significance is that it protects the nucleus. And it protects what's really processing this information, whether or not to be fired. Okay, so the nucleus decides on that, obviously. The cell body is just protecting it. And where the axon's connected to, along with the dendrites. You guys good with that? The soma, the cell body? All right, so the neuron, the axon, this is really the main part. Without the axon, there's no way this information, well, I won't say it's the main part, but without the axon, there's no way that this could be passed to another neuron. Okay, this is that one long string, that one way highway, really, of connecting to other neurons. So obviously each part is very important, but without the axon, there's no way this information can be sent to another neuron. And it acts like the one single transmitter fiber that extends from the soma to the axon terminals to connect to another neuron. So again, that one-way fiber, one-way street, really. Has action potential, moves down the axon. Okay, there's no going back. You just can't bring it back up to the soma, the cell body, to be processed again. When you think of the axon, it's that one single fiber that branches from the soma, sending information through action potential, which we'll talk about, to the other axon terminals. You guys good with that? Yeah, okay. So here's the axon again. Extension of the neuron through which neural impulses are sent. So the axon speaks and the dendrites listen. Pretty simple, pretty self-explanatory. Dendrites receive this information as the axon is passing this information from the cell body, from the soma, the nucleus, to another neuron. I thought this was interesting too. In some neurons, like those of the brain, the axons are very short, very small. Okay, they're interneurons that connect these motor and sensory neurons together. And obviously are very short, very small. But in others, like those of the leg, they can reach up to 3 feet long, which is pretty crazy. It's pretty long. Even at the microscopic level, these stretch very, very long distances. Like I said, the more we perform a task, the thicker, the stronger the neural connection is. Right, Raven? All right, so again, the axon connects from the cell body to the axon terminals. One single fiber. Okay, we'll talk about action potential tomorrow more in detail, but this is important to talk about now as we understand what the axon really does. So action potential is just the firing of a neuron. It's how this information is being sent down the axon in one-way direction to another neuron. So it is really the firing signal as these neurotransmitters are being aid and help to benefit the movement of this message being sent from the soma, from the nucleus. So again, we'll talk about action potential tomorrow and how the firing of neuron kind of relates to a toilet, which is really weird to think about, but it actually makes sense when we break it down. So action potential is just really that first fire, that first signal being sent down the neuron, this process of information being sent down the axon. All right, so the myelin sheath, that is the outer coating, the protective layer of the axon. So a good example of it would be like an extension cord. I'm sure everybody has handled an extension cord before. So obviously you have the inner fibers, the axon, right? That actually sends the electrical charge to whatever you're trying to power on, right? Whatever you're trying to utilize. The myelin sheath acts like that protective coating around it. Okay, so obviously it protects the axon from any type of damages that may occur. And at the same time, it helps with the movement of the action potential. So myelin sheath, the outer coating, the protective layer of the axon, and at the same time, with the nodes of Ranvier that are found within the myelin sheath, this helps action potential occur, helps with the sending of this information down the axon. So with the myelin sheath, again, just the outer protective cover of the axon. Like I said, the nodes of Ranvier, they are microscopic holes, spaces, spots within the myelin sheath that helps aid the travel of action potential. This allows for information to be sent down the axon fast, efficient. And like I said, these smaller holes within the myelin sheath acts as a way to push action potential down the axon. So without the nodes of Ranvier, action potential could be lost, could be stopped within the axon. Even though it's a one-way direction, one-way fire, this could be altering its course, right? This could really stop the action potential from actually reaching the axon terminals to branch out and connect to another neuron. I had the axon terminals here. All right, so the last part of the neuron that I want you guys to know is really just the axon terminals. Okay, the terminal branches that really branch off the axon. Okay, these branches, these axon terminals, they reach out to other dendrites of the neuron, connect to it, allow for really information to be sent from one neuron to another. The axon terminals reach out, they branch out, connect to dendrites of another neuron so that information can be sent, allowing action potential to occur and communication amongst neurons to happen. All right, is there any questions on the axon? You guys good? Gar, are you good? All right. Okay. All right, so I'd like you guys to work on the activity now. I'm going to attach. It's just understanding the parts and functions of the neuron. Shouldn't take you too long to complete. There's parts and functions of the neuron. This is what it looks like here. You might have to write it down. It's a PDF, but you also could take a picture of it and write it in obviously in the photo app. So you're just going to label the neuron, the different parts. Okay, as you can see here, it's numbered. And I want you to describe the function of each part. Okay? All right, there you go. Yeah, go ahead. Were you paying attention?
Yeah, I was. Want to see my notes?
Hmm.
I just had